Welcome to your Daily Dose. My name is Robert. I'm here with Michael. Michael, it's been several years since we've had our last conversation, and I just wanted to thank you first of all because to remind you once again that your part of your appearance showed up in the latest Boys of Summer and Third Base, which we premiered at the World Parkinson Congress. Very well received, and as always, your words, your expertise, your heart are very much appreciated.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and right back at you. And just so grateful for all that you do for the community, bringing education and getting the word out. And our voices matter, telling our stories. So thanks, Robert. Appreciate you.
You're very welcome. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't see the Pele jersey behind you. That captures me right away. Coming off of the World Cup, was that a big thing for you? Pele, was he your guy growing up as well?
So I love Pele, and I'll tell you why I love Pele. Pele played with a certain amount of joy,
Mm.
and probably in an era where athletes weren't paid what they are now. It wasn't as a big time to be an athlete. And when you watched him, you could get a sense of inspiration and joy through the fact that he loved being there. He loved every minute of what he was doing. And so I think there's some example in that. And so I like watching Pele because I feel like he plays with a certain joy that we don't see in all athletes.
Yeah, I had a Pele lunchbox growing up, and I'll never forget it. And just seeing him on your wall, I had to call that out. The other thing I see in your background there, the Parkinson's plan, I wanted to bring that up as well because it's been about a year since that was published. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's been almost a year, or about right at a year, and yeah, it's been a really amazing journey.
So here's the thing, you write something, you put so much into it, and you don't know always what's going to come of it, right? You put it out there, you say, this is what we feel, this is what we think. What has your journey been like the year since you published it? What have you learned? What maybe surprised you about the Parkinson's plan?
Yeah, well, first of all, we it was a real honor to write it, and it was written with Ray Dorsey and and we went back and forth. Spent a couple of years writing that book. We had done another book called Ending Parkinson Disease with Boston Bloom and Todd Scherer back in 2020. Right as the pandemic had struck. That book was supposed to be called The Parkinson Pandemic, and the publisher didn't like that terms of sort of ancient history, but kind of interesting. And then they were like, "Oh shoot, we should have called it the Parkinson pandemic. It would have been perfect." It was literally the same month the pandemic had come out. But my wife and I, we stay involved in a lot of charitable organizations, and so we try to make sure we're giving back to the community. Same with Ray and I on this, and making sure proceeds go to good causes. But the response has been tremendous. It's been inspiring. We went on a book tour all over the world, and we were able to listen, and we called it a listening tour. So we were able to listen to people and to try to feel what they feel and understand where the touch points are in Parkinson. We were very struck by the stories that we heard. We were also you know very surprised at how many people came up to us and said, "Gosh, how did I not know this?" And then you look at science, and we realize there's this huge gap between what we know and what we communicate to the public. And we've known for decades that well water is associated with a higher risk of getting Parkinson disease, presumably because of pesticides and chemicals and things. We've known that. Like we even ask medical students and residents and people for licensing exams to answer that, tick that box on the multiple choices being associated with Parkinson. We don't do anything about it. We've known about dry cleaners. We've known about these environmental risk factors. And we also now have an expanding number of papers that show us how prevalent the genetics are, and that the genetics are important, but not the only story. And so I think those things were really important, but also reaching in and being able to talk to people from all over the world, not just persons with disease, but also experts in Parkinson, but in HIV, in cancer, and say, okay, we need to learn why. Why does it start? Why does it progress? Why does it spread? And now I think in writing that book and talking to people, I feel inspired that we have a chance to look upstream and answer those questions, because 20 years ago we didn't have the same tools we have. And now we can communicate to other scientists, build us tools that will allow us to walk up the stream and see what it is up that stream that's starting this process with Parkinson. And so I think the learning why, which is the L, P is the prevent it, L is the learning why was important. And then the advocacy, the advocacy needed to, be reworked. So we move our chess pieces differently. We're doing it wrong in care all over the world, and we do it better in other areas like cancer, HIV, other diseases, diabetes. We need a new care model, and so we can build on other people's care model. And then there's so much hope, and that was the end for navigating to new therapies. And I think just talking to people about that hope and where the research is going that may pan to therapeutics, and how we can create a plan that is going to bring in enough dollars to make the changes that we need to make, but that we have a plan. And I don't think we've had as much thought yet into what that plan is going to be. There are several countries, not just the United States, getting together Parkinson councils and talking about plans and things like that. And so I think that it's really important. And we try to be bold with the 0, 10, 100, 0% rise in Parkinson by 2035, 10 times increase in research funding, and 100% access to dopamine. And also be bold to say we're going to be needing to spend $2 to $3 billion a year, billion with a B, but to do it with a plan, and we can make progress. And so I'm encouraged. I don't ever, I wouldn't ever say that the Parkinson plan is the plan. I think it's a starting point for a dialogue. And we like to say it's not really a book, it's more of a movement. And Parkinson Disease Avengers, people like you that are on the ground, are going to be the ones that have to carry that movement forward. And, just some of the principles I think could be helpful as we try to take our next steps. But it's been amazing. And I would say the most amazing part has been visiting with persons with disease all over the planet, and also, trying to create those bridges and things that are going to allow us the opportunity to create impact.
I love it. And there's a couple things in there that I heard I want to unpack. Number one is from a scientific standpoint, one thing you guys do extraordinarily well, both in this and in ending Parkinson's disease, is make the sometimes very difficult to understand digestible. And so an example of that, when you mentioned those hard targets, right? The 0, 10, 100, for example, that right away gives people numbers to point at that can say, oh, that there's an actual goal here. Because when we broadly say something like, we want a cure for Parkinson's, of course, we want that. That can become disheartening over time when we go, what does that even mean? And as you've probably seen with Boz recently, the idea where he's exploding this idea of saying, what if there's not a cure? There's millions of cures because we're individualizing the experience and the journey of that. Fascinating concept and really empowering of the people. And I think that's part of what you guys are doing by, number one, putting out the information and the data the way you see it in a digestible form, but then going out, like you said, and listening. What are you hearing? What you read the book? What did you see? What did you feel? What did you notice? And letting that come back and impact you. It all adds up to me, which is kind of my summary at the moment anyway, which is that connection is medicine. We in Parkinson's, the revolution to me, one of the biggest in the last 20 years, is that exercise is medicine is a clinical term at this point, right? That no longer are doctors saying that'd be nice, do it if you can. But no, it's medicine. It is the one disease modifying thing we have, right? If we could take the next step to say that connection is medicine, and that's across multiple domains, not just for the people with Parkinson's care partners, but the connection, which is exactly what you're talking about, the healthcare providers, the researchers, the wellness experts, communally. If we can treat connection as medicine so that these dialogues, these movements are happening in concert, I think that's where we make a big impact. How does that strike you?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think it's the pieces of the puzzle, right, that have to come together, and the connectivity is, part of the secret sauce that's going to change, over time. It's going to allow us the opportunity to make impactful change. We can make change. The question is can we make impactful change? And same thing goes for those people listening who live in the United States. I know everybody doesn't live in the United States, but there's Parkinson Council, and there's a number of public members. I'm one of the public members of that council. My job isn't to espouse my own beliefs, about this. My job is to help to bring the what the people want, to see changes. So when those recommendations go to Health and Human Services and to the Congress, they can be aligned with the changes that can be very impactful to folks who have Parkinson. And so there are public comments for that. And I think it's really, really important, Robert, that we empower people to be part of those processes, not just in the U.S. But around the world. And speaking to and leaning in a little bit to Boss Bloom's comments, it's the concept that Parkinson's isn't one disease, and maybe there isn't one answer for everyone. Now, if you go up that stream, the hope, like let's talk about hope, and he talks about dopamine, but the not dopamine, but dopamine. The hope is that you get far enough up that stream that you understand where it starts, how it spreads and how it progresses, that there could be, some convergence where some of the therapies could help all. And then the other question is, helping people to understand the difference between a symptomatic therapy that would be like a drug, exercise, deep brain stimulation versus a therapy that may delay disease progression. And you mentioned that one of those candidate therapies is exercise, may have some, even if it's small, it may have some small, effect on delaying disease progression. And then C, that's the third bucket. I always explain to people there are three buckets. A symptomatic bucket, this comes from our 10 Secrets book many years ago. Symptomatic bucket of therapies, a slow disease progression or disease modification in some way, which would be great. Delay it, and then you die from something else, right? And then the third bucket is the C bucket. People call that the cure bucket. And over the years, I've always advocated that we don't call it the C bucket, we call it the P bucket, but not the P bucket for the reason you think I'm saying the P bucket. The P bucket for exactly what Boss Bloom is saying, the personalization bucket. There is some hope, though, Robert, that there'll be some convergence. Even in the Cure Parkinson Disease Trust study that's going on now with Ambroxol and GBA1, mutation carriers, and of course, trying to rev that enzyme up, you'll notice that they are running a group of people with GBA1, but they're also running a group of people that don't have GBA1, right? And so the question is how some of these therapies, will they cross over or will they be very personalized? And when you're watching a commercial on cancers on TV, you're enjoying your favorite mystery thriller or crime scene thing, and then the thing comes up and there's a cancer ad and it says, if you have this specific cancer, get this specific therapy. And so I think there's going to be an era where that happens for diseases like Parkinson's disease. And but the hope is that some of the therapies for cancers work across, cancers and across things. There could be a larger swath, of things that could be improved. And the other thing we talk about in the book is the success of combination therapies in the history of HIV was, revolutionary, and the history of cancer was revolutionary. And Parkinson's, it's coming. We haven't made it quite to the combination therapy era, but you can see there's a paper and a combination therapy group that has formed in the UK, that's very interested in this idea. And I think it's another idea that should give us some hope about, what could be coming in the future.
That's fantastic. So when, the predominant message, and I'm guessing it stays the same, but I wonder if you have something to add to it, is, if we're encouraged about where we're going, which it sounds like you are, and I'm very glad to hear it. I feel like I've seen this wave of with Parkinson's over my 25 years of being involved in it, of hope, less hope, hope, less hope. Back in the early 2000s, it was stem cells, right? It was going to be the cure within 10 years. Didn't happen. There was a downtick, and then, asonuclein, oh, we got something here, and then maybe, and then now uptick. I'm hearing genetics and things like that. In fact, I've heard a return to some degree of stem cells looked at differently all across the board, all these different things we're looking at, many more that you mentioned. Um, the For the person on the outside who's trying to get involved, you know, we constantly advocate, yes, sign up for as many clinical trials, right? And that's incredibly important. What else can they do beyond, say, the clinical trials to advocate for their personal life? We talked a little about exercise, but how should's a tough word. What is a good way that people can live their best right now while, in the same time maintaining that long-term hope or hopamine, as Boz puts forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I believe, and you probably know this because you've read some of the groups that I've been involved with writing myself and with other groups that I have a very optimistic look at things. Now, you have to be careful, I think, of being overly optimistic, and Boss and others were writing another book called the PD 100, about 100 tips, 100 secrets, a follow up to that Parkinson 10 Secrets book that's over 10 years old, by the way,
Wow.
been around a long time. But the elephant in the room, right? And I think we do, Robert, go through these phases where, all of us want to be as optimistic as we can, but also we owe it to the people with Parkinson's to also be somewhat realistic and to balance the optimism with realism and to also talk about what those elephants are in the room, for Parkinson. And I do believe that people, and we've asked folks in the clinic about this, and even back to that 10 Secrets book, when you hear the words, you have Parkinson's disease. And so we talked about those 4 or 5 words, depending on if you use the word disease on the end of it, right? And we've done this, and then subsequently Boss Bloom and others have done this. It's a very powerful exercise when you ask people, what do you think? And what they tell you, Robert, is they say, this is devastating. It's like Alzheimer's disease. It's like Lou Gehrig's disease. It's like having a brain tumor. I mean, what rolls off their tongue is the worst of the worst, in terms of potential, like what these things are. And so one of the things that I think is important to emphasize with people is that Parkinson's isn't these other diseases. My apologies to the other diseases, but it's not Alzheimer's disease. It's not ALS. And there are many subtypes, of Parkinson disease where you can go decades, with Parkinson's disease and do relatively well. And so there is a path to a happier, and healthier life with Parkinson. And that's why that book was titled 10 Secrets to a Happier Life. And it gave these 10 like things that you could do. And people were like, oh my God, like I should do these things. And when we wrote that, that was the first kind of foray that I had of writing directly to in a patient, voice for persons with disease, patients we call persons with disease. And what I learned was more people read that book than, the hundreds and hundreds of papers that my lab has written, right? And thinking about, oh, these are 10 things everybody should be doing. You're seeing experts, you're seeing all these things. It gets lost in the system. And so I think one of the messages, the core messages that people should know about is there is a path to a healthier and happier life with Parkinson. And it's not the end of the road. Larry Gifford from the PD Avengers talks about this as being not a death sentence, but a life sentence. We're all going to get something. We are all mortal. I hate to bring another elephant out of the room, Robert. We're all mortal, right? We're all going to get something. And so if you think about things more in an Eastern medicine way rather than in the Western medicine that we live in, making life beautiful is really important. And so we need to help people with Parkinson to make their lives as beautiful as possible. We need to take away that stigma. We need to allow them to live in society, but also to realize that there's good living even with the challenges, and also to help them to understand why it's not Alzheimer's, why it's not Lou Gehrig's disease. what they have and what they can look forward to. And there's still great things in their life with their families and event. There's great living that still can happen. And I think it gets lost a bit. And part of it gets lost in these fluctuations you talk about where everybody says, okay, we're going to cure Parkinson in 5 years with stem cells. Well, that was like 25 years ago. And you see these fluctuations, and then you can understand why people get demoralized. And demoralization is normal. 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people with Parkinson. If you have a chronic disease, you're going to get demoralized. Be ready for it, and let's help people to live better lives and to raise past that demoralization. So I think just looking the elephants in the room in the eye, I think is important, but also having that dopamine, is important as well. These are all elements to success. And the way that we can do that is by telling our stories. That's why we write. We write to tell stories, but it's going to be the grassroots people like you, Robert, that make the real changes. But if we can encourage people to tell their stories as much as possible, it's really going to have the best chance of creating change.
That's great. Hey, I realize we're probably getting close to time here, so let me just ask just one last thing to you. That within some of what you said connected to this idea that if Parkinson's has as much unknown in it as it continues to have, isn't there then tremendous agency in the acceptance of that unknown for not only the researchers but the people living with it? Because that says if I accept that this is unknown, therefore I can write much of this as opposed to have it, yes, like you say, there are certain things it's going to write for you, like life will write for all of us. We're all going to die. We're all going to get something or some things. However, the acceptance of the unknown of Parkinson's can be an opportunity to say, okay, here's what I get to do. And that's where agency really comes in strongly. And it's certainly part of the Parkinson's plan, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I believe that it is important to lean into that unknown rather than to lean out. And in visiting with people with the Parkinson plan, we did the book tour over the year and visiting with so many folks. I was struck by the number of stories I heard that like you're talking to somebody, and then even in an exercise group or in a card group or in a reading group, and you say you have Parkinson, and then suddenly they start treating you differently,
Mm.
and so I was struck by how many of those stories that I heard, but also struck by asking people, well, what did you do? How did you respond? And figuring out ways to respond to the stigma, to the identity that gets linked. And I was impressed by how many people took the dialogue back, where they didn't just sort of say they actually challenged back to the person and said, yeah, I have Parkinson, and guess what? I'm okay. Like I can do all these things. You don't need to treat me differently. I appreciate the fact that you can see that maybe I have a little shaking, maybe I'm a little bit slower. But it turns out, folks with Parkinson have been shot into space. Folks with Parkinson have played NBA games. Folks with Parkinson disease are major CEOs of corporations. I can do this. So thank you for recognizing that I have Parkinson. But make no bones about it. If you and I are going to compete, I can compete on the same level that you can. Whether it's in cards, whether it's in academic sparring, whether it is in discussing philosophy or investing money. And so I think people trying to reclaim themselves, I heard that, and I think that's part of the education and part of the reason your podcast and what you're doing, Robert, is so important is people need to understand how much stigma there is, that 25 to 50% of people are hiding the diagnosis of Parkinson. We need to be looking at this as a different perspective. It's like Dead Poet Society. We need to look at it from a different perspective and stand up on that desk and see that there's a different way to look at this, and to move forward and to help people move forward. And so I've been inspired. I don't know that it's the right answer, but I'm really inspired when I hear people tell me these stories and they lean into it with people rather than leaning out. They tell their story and they tell people why, like why you should, like not be, casting people with Parkinson aside. why, they should be right in the middle of society. And so I think that part of that is also getting back to your idea of being realistic and meeting the elephant in the room. If you meet the elephant in the room, then perhaps we can make more progress. And then the idea of making the journey of life beautiful for all of us, no matter what we have, because we're all mortal, I think is really, really important, very powerful.
I appreciate you bringing in multiple perspectives, philosophies. The Eastern side really hits with me as well. The idea that we open up to more than whatever our environmental or geographical biases might lead to, or familial, any of those things. Because yeah, the world's a lot bigger place than I think we give it credit for. And the more we open up to each other, and the more we listen, like you say, the more opportunity and power we see. I guess that underlines once again, connection is medicine, and I'm going to keep championing that. And I thank you for hearing that part today. Last thing, just is there anything else people should be looking at? Because this is about, as I said, community bridge, underutilized assets. If you were to point people to one thing or one resource, or maybe two or three, is there anything they should be looking at right now?
I'm biased, but I
Yeah.
absolutely love the Parkinson Foundation's 1-800, the number 4 PD info helpline. A lot of younger folks don't realize that if you look at the telephone, there are letters and numbers on it. And so if you try to dial, you can actually dial 1-800, the number 4, and then you
Hello?
spell out PD info. Somebody answers the phone. For couple of decades, we had a DOS-based system that went to a web-based system. And I don't know exactly how many questions I answered. Could have been 20,000, 30,000, thousands of questions on those systems on an old system called Ask the Doctor. And now we have grants to do this with real people. And I think it's tremendous. I meet with that group every month to talk about the harder questions or things that get bumped up, and they're really amazing. It's an interdisciplinary group. It's not just nurses, it's not just social workers. It's an interdisciplinary group that picks up the phone. And listen, I love the AI age. I have a research laboratory. I do a lot of stuff with electronics and neuromodulation and all sorts of cool things. I live a great life scientifically. But I will tell you, Robert, there's no replacement for somebody picking up the phone and having a conversation with you where you feel not rushed, and you can talk through your situation, and they can connect you with resources and answer questions. And so I think that that's sort of missing from society, and it's just a really nice thing.
You're exactly right, and you keep unpeeling things when I'm trying to wrap this up. Darn it, we need to do this more often. I hope it won't be several years before we talk like this again. I just want to thank you again for everything you do and pushing toward the connection to self, connection to others, and exploration. You have a certain joy of life that comes through you that I think is infectious, and that is a positive kind of infection, that we imbue more of that in each other to keep looking at the opportunity without ever dismissing the reality of the pain and the frustration. So thank you for all you do, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Honored to be with you. Keep spreading the dialogue and keep people talking, get them to tell their stories, Robert. Most important thing we can do, tell your story.
You bet. Oh, by the way, we got to get Boys of Summer out to Florida, so let's keep talking about that. We mentioned doing that. So, all right.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. You take care. Thanks again, Michael.
Take care. My pleasure.
Boom. There we go.